Hello and welcome to the CX Files podcast. I'm your host, Mark Hillary. We have a focus on gaming this week with Kelvin Plomer, the Director of Player Experience at Jagex, based in Cambridge in the UK. Jagex is well known for their classic RPG Runescape, but they now have a portfolio of games, including an old school version of Runescape for mobile devices. Gaming is a part of the entertainment industry, and therefore it's quite different to manage player experience when compared to planning the customer service you need to provide to a bank or energy company customer. I called Kelvin to ask about player support and how Jagex has been coping with the post-COVID business environment. All right, Kelvin, thanks for being on the CX Files podcast. First, before we get going, could you just introduce Jagex for the listeners? I mean, your best known game is Runescape, but what else are you guys up to?
Yeah, you say kind of your best known game is Runescape, and what else you're up to. Actually, Runescape is massive and is kind of the core of what we do. And we've not just got Runescape, there is old school Runescape, which is the retro version of the game. And, they've been around. We're going to actually celebrate our 20th anniversary next year. Every week it's updated with whether it's new adventures, new quests, new characters, etc. We're always adding kind of chapters to it, and it is, it's what we call a living game. So we've extended that to mobile for old school Runescape back in 2018. We're looking at Runescape, it's in beta at the minute, as well, going on to mobile. And then there are some other games that we are working on, though I'm sworn to secrecy on those as usual, I'm afraid. But yes, there definitely is additional stuff in the works. And obviously keep your eyes peeled, and we'll be announcing that as and when.
All right, that's cool. And I've got old school RuneScape on my iPhone, so
Brilliant.
So I know the game. And now gaming, I mean, we're talking about CX, but gaming is very different to most other industries. Player support, it's different to supporting an insurance customer or a bank customer. Your customers are choosing to spend time with your product. It's a choice. It's entertainment. They're usually fans of the product, and it's a very live and immersive environment. Like you mentioned, you call it a living game. You actively need to protect the players and create a safe and enjoyable environment. What challenges do you face? Working to provide a kind of safe environment for the players.
Okay, so it's probably kind of just two elements to that kind of question, I suppose. I mean, I think in terms of kind of providing that safe environment, I think really you need to look at our online communities, and certainly we look at them as a microcosm of society. If stuff goes on in real life or in social media or online in other forums, we know we're going to see it in our online games. So, we are armed with that knowledge. We then proactively seek to look for some of the bad things, if you like. We try and educate and support and kind of face up to, I suppose, that reality. We've got some great employees and moderators. We've got some fabulous systems that we've developed with our analytics team and our tech guys. And, actually we've worked with, whether it's law enforcement, the National Crimes Agency in the UK, the Internet Watch Foundation, charities. So we sort of know what to look for. And how to find it, but then really, really importantly, what to do when we do actually find it. Let's kind of stress this. These are very small elements of kind of what we do, but they are incredibly important because that's when things can go wrong. And so it's kind of incumbent upon us to look at that. So I think that's kind of one element. And then I suppose the other side, just in terms of providing player support for an entertainment, for an online kind of community, it's really complex and it's varied and it's challenging, and it's actually part of why I've been at Jagex for over 15 years, because I just love it and it is just endlessly fascinating. And I'd say about 50 to 60% of what we do is traditional support, kind of account, payment queries, technical kind of support and stuff like that. But where we sort of differ from other industries in that, we are a player experience department. We're responsible, really, I suppose, for checking systems to make sure nothing goes down out of hours. We are responsible for that online community safety. And there's 46 billion lines of chat a year in Runescape that we need to keep an eye on and moderate. We ban over 7 million cheating accounts a year. And on top of that, we keep an eye out for things like private servers, dodgy cheat communities, and we seek to take them out at source, working with our not only UKI, the games industry trade body in the UK, but also with our legal team. And then I suppose we move to be a lot more proactive. So we look for accounts that have potentially been hijacked, to lock them, safe them, secure them, and put them back in the hands of the rightful owner. But we then look for the player frustrations, the barriers, the things that bug players, not necessarily about content, but about kind of their overall kind of experience from when they're kind of logging in to getting into games, making payments, etc. And we've got this kind of voice of the player process where, one, we're proactively looking for stuff, and then secondly, we're looking at the queries that are coming in, understanding where those kind of pinch points are, and then working through that in conjunction with other teams across the company. So our world is quite big.
Yeah, and you mentioned the players themselves there, because of course, I suppose the question that I asked was really focused on the trolls and the cheats, that you mentioned that you're looking for. But how do you protect the players from their own behaviour?
What do you mean, kind of from their own behaviours? Do you mean in terms of cheating?
I mean things like maybe in-game purchases. Maybe you notice that a player who doesn't have a history of making a lot of purchases is suddenly spending hundreds of dollars a day.
Yeah. Okay. So so behaviour is quite a kind of a broad kind of definition. If you're talking about, I suppose kind of that kind of spending kind of behaviour and all the rest of it. We do things like, if a player's been logged in continuously for a period of time, they'll get a little message in the chat that says, "Hi, we can see you've been logged in for a while. You might want to take a break." And that's the same advice that we give to our employees when we're in the office, right? For all of us to get up now and again, get some fresh air, have a break, and all this, and kind of freshen up. So you've got that side of it. On the spending side, one thing that we've been kind of experimenting with is kind of proactive reaching out to people, both who seem to potentially spend a high amount compared to the average, but also specifically people that are under the age of 18, where we will have a much kind of lower threshold for that. And we will also look at kind of changes in spending behaviour as well. Because, again, that can link into maybe accounts been hijacked, or it could be fraud, or it could just be, someone's, won the lottery. We're not kind of Big Brother. We're not telling people kind of how to spend the money and all the rest of it. And actually, when we've done that kind of outreach, most of the feedback we get is, "Yeah, I'm cool. Let me kind of carry on with it." And it's been a really kind of pleasant surprise to kind of see that sort of really positive reaction from it. And you get a few people say, "Actually, leave me alone. I'm don't even trying to talk to me because I'm happy kind of doing what I'm doing." And you get a very tiny percentage that go, "Actually, I might be able to kind of do with some help." But I'm talking like less than 10 this year, kind of on that. And then obviously, we provide kind of advice and all the rest of it, whether that's limiting account spend, whether that is if they want to disable their account, all of that stuff is something that we provide. But what we're doing is reaching out to those people that we know there might be a problem, there might not be. So let's just find out and see where we're at and do, I suppose, kind of the right thing is kind of how we look at that.
Yeah. And I suppose that's really about affordability, because someone might be spending some cash in the game, but they can afford to do that. And they might have spent 50 quid, but they could have spent that in the pub, So it's a question of comparisons. What about what about the loot boxes, though? Because there's been a lot of criticism in the media this year about that. Is that unfair? I mean, or, in general, do the people buying the loot boxes really understand what they're buying into?
I think so. This goes back. You and I are old enough to remember all your kind of football stickers and all the rest of it, right? And you'd go and spend your pocket money in the shop on a pack of cards. You wouldn't know exactly what was going to be in it, and you'd trade it and share it, and you get rare ones, or most of the time you wouldn't. So, that principle is kind of applied to loot boxes, and I don't want to underplay it, but that is kind of the principle of loot box type mechanics in games. And some games probably do them more overtly, and others kind of have them embedded in other kind of aspects of gameplay. It is a fascinating and important topic. I think it's it's one that is open to a bit of clickbait, if I'm perfectly honest. I think some of the media sort of grabs on some of the headlines that come out, and that's not a particularly positive or healthy debate. And I think, if you want to kind of get into the kind of the technicalities of it, I think, loot box mechanics, apart from a real handful of countries across the world, and in Europe, let's take Netherlands and Belgium as two, that have sort of classified games of chance in some way as a type of gambling. Other than that, there is no regulation around that across the world. And that's because it's virtual, it's not real money. The items have no legal real world value. And I, by that, I'm not kind of looking to sidestep on a legal definition. I actually don't, right? It's actually a legal black market activity that breaks that wall of virtual to real money. And as I kind of mentioned just a minute ago, we actually go after then those sites that are involved in that kind of black market and try and take them down as much as we possibly can. And over the last 2 years, we've actually really beefed up the amount of work that we do that, because they're dodgy. That links to cheating, it links to hijacking, it links to poor account security, all these kind of phishing attempts and all the rest of it. So they're not a good place to be. Then secondly, I suppose the debate around loot boxes and all the rest of it. There are some areas that, like I say, sort of jump on that kind of clickbait, and that's been fueled by the House of Lords in the UK recently published a report, the Department of Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee, which I actually gave evidence to last year, as well, kind of picked up on particular kind of headlines, and the media then kind of grabbed those. And their starting point really is games are bad, we're going to prove that they're bad. Recently, though, I've actually seen a lot more balanced stuff. The UK government's response to that Select Committee report, and also an EU report on tackling loot boxes, which came out like 2 weeks ago, are much more positive about gaming. And I think, let's think about this in the context of this kind of COVID world that we're in, right? Here we are as online companies, we are continuing to operate, we're continuing to engage people. And actually the industry has done a lot to support both kind of government messaging, as well as kind of charitable initiatives and all that. That really is across the industry, and we're no kind of different to that. So think about kind of the situation we're in, where actually you've got very healthy businesses that are paying their taxes, where employees are safe, and they're really looking after the well-being of their employees. And that's not off the back of exploiting people, it's providing entertainment for players, and for players that actually we care a huge amount for. And, we see that with our big fan events, and just the kids in the sweet shop kind of sort of with stars in their eyes, because they're getting to kind of meet the creators of this game and all the rest of it. So that's the bigger context of kind of all of this. And that's not to bury our heads in the sand and ignore that at all. We've actually engaged a huge amount with the British government, with potential regulatory agencies and all the rest of it, in a very proactive way, to try and kind of understand where they're coming from. And we've kind of got this sort of broad, proactive duty of care studio initiative that I kind of head up, and that's about us going a lot further than many companies do. It's about going a lot further than perhaps government is saying, or regulators are saying that they want us to do. And that's because we want to preserve our entertainment for our players, and we want to provide that entertainment for our players. And yes, there are challenges along the way. Of course, there are in any single business. There are regulatory compliances, GDPR came and hit us all in the face a couple of years ago, right? But we absorb it, we do the right thing, and we move forward. And I think we don't want to be nanny state, but we want to be proactive, definitely.
Yeah, and one of the great things is you mentioned there about looking after the developers, your employees at Jagex. And I know that, not so long ago, you received an award from Mind, the mental health charity, for actually the measures that you take to look after the team. But I saw also that Jagex has raised quite a lot of cash for Mind. I mean, specifically the Cambridge and Peterborough affiliation of Mind, which, you guys are based in Cambridge. So it's your local mental health charity. And it was the players that contributed all the cash. So how did that come about? And how did the partnership with Mind come about?
Okay, so I suppose mental health has become increasingly important to us probably over the last 6 or 7 years as a company. So we saw increasing needs, calls for help, need for support for our employees. And we then really leveled up our wellbeing strategy. And part of that then was actually taking part in the inaugural Mind Mental Health Index. The first year we did that, we got a bronze award. The second year we did that, we got a silver award, which meant we were making progress and we were getting that kind of feedback and understanding, okay, actually, we are doing the right things for our employees. And then about 4 years ago, I was asked to kind of head up Jagex's charitable initiatives. We'd always done charity stuff in the past, but it had never been particularly kind of focused or coordinated. So for me then, really at that time, it was a logical step to then focus on mental health, and not only look at a program of fundraising, but also use that fabulous reach that we've got with this brilliant online community, or these online communities, to then broadcast the messages, the awareness raising, give people links and signposts to kind of help, and all the rest of it, as well as being able to provide skill support for actually 3 charities. It's not only a local mine. There are 2 other organisations that we supported as well. And over that time, we've raised, I think, nearly £1 million in just under 4 years, specifically for mental health. We do in-game events. We've got the banners for each of our charity partners in-game. People can engage with them and get advice, and then get those links on to additional stuff. And recently, actually, with the whole COVID and lockdown, we knew that traditional fundraising was really drying up for the charities, well, for the charity sector across the board, but specifically for mental health. It was also a time when they needed to provide increased help and support for people who were struggling with lockdown and with isolation. So actually, we then pulled together a huge amount of additional work and support, both on an engagement side from content, but also in terms of information and guidance and support for our players as quickly as we possibly could. And we got all that out in kind of April and May, and gave a huge injection of funds, in part from the company, but in part from our players. And the fundraising is really about our players embracing what we're doing, really engaging with it, and helping to support the mental health charities that we've asked them to, and it's been fantastic, and we get a great response from them.
That's cool. That's great. It's great to see that, the kind of connection there between the development community and the players.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you were called up to Westminster as a witness, when the Department for Culture, Media and Sport were putting together their online harms white paper.
Yeah.
I know that you don't want to speak for the entire gaming industry, but what's your opinion? I mean, do these kind of government initiatives go far enough, or is it really up to the government to be protecting the players, or is it up to responsible companies?
I think you're always going to have that kind of 2-pronged approach, right? You're going to want, any responsible business is going to want to be proactive and do things in the right way and make the right kind of decisions. Secondly, you are always going to have an element of regulation that you need to comply with, and that's fine. And some countries do that kind of differently to others. And I mentioned GDPR earlier, and obviously we've had that across the EU. There's now different state kind of laws around kind of privacy and freedom of information in the United States. Brazil's looking at that as well. So, we're plugged into kind of all of that, and we understand the reasons why. And actually, through that sort of GDPR experience, we know if we can be more proactive and put ourselves in a strong footing anyway, that's always going to help us and help the people that we're here to serve, if you like, which is our players. So in terms of kind of government legislation, it's been really interesting being involved in the consultation on this. I kind of mentioned the Department of Culture, Media Select Committee. I'm not sure they were particularly well informed, and I think their starting point was wrong. However, when we've then engaged with civil servants, both from the Home Office and also the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, around 2 major pieces of legislation coming. One is the online harms legislation due to be tabled in the UK Parliament at the end of this year, and also from the Information Commissioner's Office, the Age Appropriate Design Code. We have engaged and consulted numerous times around that to help, I suppose, those lawmakers understand where we're coming from. Let me give you one example of things they're talking about. It's things like use of VPN. Well, we know players use VPNs to get better ping so they can have a better gameplay experience. We also know it makes people kind of more anonymous and all the rest of it. So there's a balance. But the legislators didn't know about that until we told them, right? So actually that opportunity to engage, open their eyes, show them how we do stuff. We've invited them to Jagex, both DCMS and the Home Office. They've come to us, we've shown them our systems, we've shown them kind of how we work, what's on our roadmap and all the rest of it. And that's part of getting them to understand where we come from. And I think, again, in that kind of government response, we see them acknowledging actually there is a really kind of positive place for a really healthy industry here in the UK. So, do those things go far enough? I think sometimes they go a little bit too far. And I think we would always favour a proactive result from games companies rather than having to wait for regulation and then having to kind of react to that. But that's always got to be a dialogue.
I wanted to ask you about some of the post-COVID experience. Obviously you've got all the team working from home now. And I heard you recently on a Gaming the Mind podcast saying that you've got 3 team huddles a day rather than just one. I mean, is this a good example of how the communication is changing within the company and the way that you need to communicate with the team inside a sort of work from home environment? Everything's changed, but you still got to be close to the team sometime. Yeah,
definitely. Really, really interesting. So we actually started working from home about a week or so before the UK instituted lockdown, which I think speaks volumes for the way Jagex approaches the well-being and safety of its employees. And I think it was very conscious for all of us straight away of the need to really turn up communication. And everything just takes that little bit longer when you've got to do everything on Zoom or kind of on the phone. You're not having those little corridor chats or bumping into someone and just kind of doing it. And you can't just quickly wander over to someone's desk and have a little chat. So, I think some of it we were just kind of figuring it out very early on kind of ourselves. And then that was things like, let's make sure we have these really regular huddles going on. Let's make sure we're checking in with everyone, not just on our work and our KPIs and our targets and all the rest of it, but actually just on people's well-being. And then I think as we started, in those first kind of couple of weeks to kind of figure out about it, then there was a lot of information coming out from our people operations team, from our facilities, from our IT, and importantly from our HR kind of team. And that was about, whether it is, are you going to struggle at home because you've suddenly got kids running around and all the rest of it, whilst you're kind of trying to do your work, and, a very relaxed attitude to that. And all of this came from the top down, from the CEO, from the exec team, talking to managers, making sure that managers were then talking to their guys to realise that well-being was the prime importance. And fundamentally, every single piece of communication, whether it was email, we do fortnightly company live streams, where the CEO is kind of talking to us. Every single one of those, the importance of well-being was stressed, and it was the top point and the first point kind of made. So that sent a fabulous message to everyone. And there are trials in that. There are some teams that are down to 50-60% productivity. There are other teams like player support and localization that I look after who are absolutely fine around kind of 90 to 100% productivity. But it's then understanding, okay, right, we don't want to pressure those people in that situation. How can we make things easier? And some of that's technology, and some of that is just about the interactions that you kind of have. And one other really tiny example, we then instituted Zoom free time in the middle of the day. So I think 3 times a week, it's an hour of Zoom free time, and 2 days a week, it's 2.5 hours of Zoom free time. So, you get a proper chance to have a break and, either focus on some work or just go and chill out because the situation's done your head in. And we know that has been the case. And have that kind of officially recognised and almost kind of promoted has been really strong and positive. And again, is part of why I love working for Jagex, to be honest.
Yeah, do you think that this whole experience is really just, it's helping people to get that kind of flexibility that they've probably wanted for years anyway? So the focus is more on what are you delivering at work rather than, how many hours you're sitting at the office developing. If you need to leave early because of childcare, then who cares? Yeah. Because you're working at home and people are focused on what you're delivering.
Maybe though, we've always had that approach, to be honest. again, having kind of been here for quite a long time, Jagex genuinely is a progressive and flexible employer. Our tech and our infrastructure didn't always facilitate that, and it really does now. So that's kind of helped. But in terms of, that thing of, you need to go to the doctors, or you need to go and pick up your kids, or you need to go and do this or that, or the odd work from home day because stuff's kind of going on in your real life. That's always been cool with Jagex, and that just makes your work a lot easier, and it makes your life a lot easier. And I think if we've learned anything out of this COVID thing, is we need to realise that people need time and space to live, and an employer can really help facilitate that and can make a really positive impact on you in that.
Okay, that's perfect. So just finally, I just wanted to have a sort of positive point at the end, because, we've talked about the way that we need to support players and developers, and the politicians often they come into this looking quite negatively at games, and we need to sort of educate them. But, what are some of the positive aspects of gaming that you've seen in your experience? I mean, especially over this period post-COVID. I mean, are you seeing people develop relationships or helping others? I mean, what's happened that's been really surprising or interesting?
I wouldn't say that COVID particularly changed that for us, because, I mean, there's a fabulous, I'm going to do a little plug here, but there is a fabulous RuneScape documentary on YouTube, and you can see on there some real life stories of people who have met kind of over the years, and they met in RuneScape, and some people are married and got kids, and it really is a common tale, right? Especially because we've been around for so long. People have properly grown up with RuneScape as a massive kind of part of their lives. And let's not forget, RuneScape was a social media chat site before social media existed, right? That was a big part of our USP and a big part of our attraction. So many real life friendships, and then friend groups, and whether those are clan related or whether they're LGBT kind of groups, whether they're interest groups and all the rest of it, we know that those people exist within our environment of RuneScape. We see them when we do our fan events at RuneFest kind of every year. But one great recent example was in RuneScape, we did a Pride Parade event. It was supported by over 30 employees. We had fabulous engagement, really positive, loads of videos all over the place from players who participated in that, and some nice kind of write-ups in media, both mainstream and in LGBT kind of press as well. So it's just an example of a really vibrant community that has an idea. We pick up on that, and then we try and kind of support them. And we've done that so many times over the years. There's almost kind of too many to mention. It's just a very social game, RuneScape, and that's part of its joy.
Yeah, and that's perfect. And I mean, certainly over the lockdown quarantine period, I think people often forget that the games are so social. So there has been this online community. Yeah.
And I think government has really recognised that, certainly kind of here in the UK, and they do look at the gaming industry as very, very positive. And let's not forget, during COVID, a lot of games companies did Games for Carers initiative, right? Was it over 80,000 game codes for National Health Service workers? We raised over 200 grand in a month and donated that to our charities, as well as providing government information about what to do, as well as providing mental health information. So we're not the bad guys that we're painted out to be sometimes. I actually think there's a hell of a lot of positive stuff in games.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. Please take a moment to review the podcast, because this helps other listeners to find it. And if you have any suggestions, then get in touch with me on Twitter or LinkedIn. I'm @Mark Hillary with 2 L's, or just search Google for Mark Hillary.